Hi, I'm Rob Vanstone. Welcome to another impromptu edition of the Rider Rumblings podcast. I'm used to calling it the Rider Rumblings video podcast, but technology being as it is right now, we're relying on audio and something called Zencaster, Lancaster. So that's good for me. Murray McCormick is with us in socially distant fashion from his East Regina estate, and we're going to talk about the CFL and federal funding and myriad issues pertaining to the COVID-19 as it affects football. So, Mur, we'll start off with you. What do you make of all this?
First off, I'm going to start on a happy note. Can I? Golf course is open tomorrow in Saskatchewan. Let's celebrate that little bit of normalcy returning to our lives, that people are finally going to be able to go out and do something fun in restrictive world, and I'm sure golfers will all do that, but let's celebrate. Golf course is opening tomorrow, Rob. What's your best score at the Lakeview? I kind of
59. I'm the Al Geiberger of the Lakeview Par 3 golf course. I got a 59 out there in 1983. So I'm actually getting that itch again. I want to go out there and golf because it's actually something we can do. So I'm going to be investigating the Lakeview Par 3 over the weekend.
A lot of things have happened and we question what's going on in the world. But I initially, when they first announced golf courses opening, I thought it was too soon. I really did, but I've kind of mellowed in the last couple of weeks since that announcement, and I've talked to golfers, and I'm even going to get out golfing, so I'm really excited about it. But on a sad point, I have time to golf because there's no CFL training camps this weekend.
Yeah, we didn't expect you to be golfing this weekend, or we expected to fire you if you were golfing this weekend.
I'm hoping, but I normally on this weekend I had planned to be working like crazy, covering the first Rider training camp at Mosaic Stadium, the new Mosaic Stadium. They were supposed to hold it there because of they're supposedly putting in new turf and renovations up north in Saskatoon. So you and I would have been up to our ears in football and thinking, man, what are we going to do this year? How are we going to handle a Grey Cup year? You know, we're looking at each other. You'll tell me how great of a job and how you do it for free. And I'd say, yes, I agree with you, and sort of smirking a little bit. But it's just a total alternative universe that we never, ever dreamed would happen. Even when we started writing about this way back in March, the sense was I didn't think it was going to last this long, even though we did. But you know what I mean by that? That you just thought it'd be it was a pandemic, but I never thought we'd be sitting here in mid-May, not having any training camps, not knowing when the season is going to start, dealing with the ramifications of not even having a season. Like, it's just been so many things that's going on, and you just say, well, at least tomorrow we got golf. So how's that for my opening? It doesn't have anything to do with anything, but it's just, hey, I'm sitting at home alone all the time. The cats don't even talk to me, so it's kind of nice to have a chat with someone. Anyway, Rob, what was the question?
And the tiger cats don't talk to you either. So, sorry.
Again?
What's your take on the federal funding? Mine is this. The league obviously has some optics issues. It's never an easy sell at the best of times to advance the notion that professional sports should get taxpayers' money. In the midst of a pandemic, it's even an infinitely tougher sell. Now you factor in the Americans, and I think you can look at that from two standpoints. One, the league has de-emphasized Canadians so much over the last decade or two that it is coming back to bite them, or at least nibble on them now. And two, should the federal government be subsidizing the salaries of American-born players, most of whom are the high-profile players in the league? I would argue yes, because there's a larger issue, which is preserving a Canadian identity or a Canadian institution in the form of the Canadian Football League. Plus, a lot of those players, or all of those players, would pay taxes in Canada. So why shouldn't they derive benefits from a bailout if that money is to be forthcoming? But that's just my view. What's your opinion, Mur?
I'm with you. I think the players are getting kind of slammed unfairly in this. They make their living in Canada. They pay their taxes in Canada. They pay into EI in Canada. They contribute to the Canadian lifestyle. They come up here and they're somehow, I guess everyone thinks CFL players are millionaires. And you and I both know there's few millionaires in the CFL other than the guys who are quarterbacks and they make a lot of money. So I think The players deserve, even though they live in the States, they're still employees and they make their living in Canada. And I think that's overlooked in this whole thing. That let's support guys who do something in Canada and work, and that's my thing. I'm still I'm still unhappy with Randy Ambrosie's presentation last Thursday, but this was the 1 week anniversary. I think he was unprepared in a sense that I've always said that Randy's a great businessman, absolutely businessman, doing all these things. He wasn't a very good politician on that day, and I think he was a little overwhelmed and overshadowed by what he did. I think he could have been better prepared. I think they should have had a game plan ready. I think they should have had some sort of statement when they asked him about the players. This is what we're doing with the players. I'm not know what he's going to say, but he should have had something to do with that. So I was still disappointed in that. I still think one of the parts about this Canadian CFL is it's people talk about they should be supported. I think the economic impact of CFL teams are really being overlooked here. They're a small business and a big business picture. The economic impact of how many employees work with whoever has place is a story I had today in the paper. 400 to 500 people work at Everest Place for every Rider game. It generates 1.8 million in ticket sales. You have all the auxiliary people whose lives are lapped up in working, and part of their lives are because the CFL is there. So I think it's not just supporting a professional league; it's a professional league with huge economic benefits to Canada, and even the teams that are struggling, things still work out. So from that standpoint, it should be supported, and I think it's. I would like to see it. The 150 million is a lot of money, but I think I've said this before. There's billions being talked about out there now. Isn't 150 million relatively? Now I don't want to say it's no money, but it's a relatively a real understandable sum for the CFL to ask. But I also want to mention this is a long answer. I'm getting like you. That's the worst case scenario. This 150 million. I think the CFL needs the 30 million right now to get it to the point where they can actually have a season. In my mind, because
I
there's
think
no
that's
income.
the workable figure right now.
I
Just
think I
I
think
could see them giving the payments in installments as needed, as opposed to committing to a massive amount that may not be required.
yeah, that's the worst case scenario, and I think Randy deserves. He had to do that. He had to bring up. You don't go in there and tell him, well, look, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers had 3.5 million, and the Eskimos made 2.5 million or 4 million. The Riders. You don't tell them all the good news because you're asking for money. I think the fact is, like, if they don't have a season, the season ticket holders are going to ask for their money back in sponsorship, and that's going to crush the Rough Riders, a whole league. And I think that's what Randy did. He brought that up. I don't think he did a good enough job of stressing that. But did what did you think, Rob? Did you think like we both had it was jarring, not unexpected, but I don't know, it just wasn't transparent enough. I just feel that they may have blown their chance a little bit because of that. Do you think that's
Yeah,
going to come
they
back
didn't
to bite
help
them?
their chance, and there will be other opportunities, but the optics were so bad right out of the gate. The fact that the players hadn't been part of the pitch, and that they were so far behind in terms of even incorporating the players into the discussions, not only with the federal government, but with the Canadian Football League, was a very bad look and a surprising look. Because if you go to Randy's road trip or if you see him in public, usually he's capable of owning a room and winning over an audience, and that's not what he did during his presentation to the House of Commons Committee on Finance. Uh, it's a tough situation for any sports commissioner. You look at there's so many unknowns, and you can't account for every possibility because nobody knows what what the lay of the land is going to be. The smartest people in the world are lost for answers right now. Until there's a vaccine, I don't think anything can be stated definitively. But that said, Randy Ambrosie did not handle that as well as he could have, and as well as one would have expected him to, considering the manner in which he usually presents himself and presents the league by extension.
What a part that has me scratching my ever growing bald spot is how do the CFL pay players if there aren't any games? Because CFL paychecks are based on 18 games a regular season. Their checks are based on playing games. So how do you extrapolate that? We have no games, so how do we pay these people? I don't know how they do that. Do you know what I'm trying to say there? That they have no income coming in. So how do they? So maybe including the players in the initial ask might have been a little premature to see what they could get, but as it's optic wise. I don't know. Players are played by the game. If you don't have any games, how do you play them? Pay them? I don't know.
Yeah, and how much do you pay them
Yeah,
in light of just if you don't have any games? Do you still pay the peak salaries of $700,000, $725,000, or do you account for the times and say, look, we can't justify $700,000 for not playing any games? Will you take less? Can they negotiate a percentage of that? So many people in so many sectors are taking pay cuts if they're still fortunate enough to be employed. So it wouldn't be unreasonable to say, look, can you take a 10% or a 20% haircut, to the extent that you can even get a haircut these days? And will that be amenable? For a Bo
a
Levi Mitchell
10%
or a
pay
Mike Riley,
cut.
that's still major cash. For someone who was supposed to earn $65,000, the league minimum this year, you shave $6,000, $12,000 off that. That's a pretty significant sum. But I think you've got to protect some of these players. If not, maybe they just find work in other areas, get comfortable with that, take a year off football unavoidably, and then you never see them again because they've established another career. I think you need some kind of transitional funding to ensure that you still have a player base that's reputable if and when you do return to action.
Well, I also think that what are the players doing now? Like, I wonder how many are going to retire. Their wives are going to say, "Look, you can go up to Canada and make, well, let's say 75,000 Canadian for if they can make that much. Like, if you play 8 games, you only make 35, 37,000 Canadian. If you only play 8 games, 9 games, is your salary cut in half? And then it's Canadian dollars, and we know the Canadian dollar is not in very good shape now too. So there's a lot of logistical things that are still facing players' own decisions, and we still haven't even talked about, will the border even allow them to come across? How will we have a football league if American players aren't allowed to come in Canada? Because they're still debating that, and they're talking maybe the end of June they might ease some of the travel restrictions, but do they come across and they get 14-day quarantine? Can the CFL afford to put up 400 or 500 men eating and living in buildings, doing whatever they're going to keep them for 14 days before they can play?
And I wouldn't be in a hurry to open a border right now. When
No.
you look at
Well, I don't
the,
want to have
the
any.
you look at the degree of the problem is escalating in the United States. You're seeing it subsiding in some areas and still in lockdown mode in others. Look at California. That's the largest state in the USA, and they're still in serious lockdown mode. It's not that much of an issue if you want someone from North Dakota to come into Canada, but once you open that border, who knows? And how can you possibly account for things just by taking temperatures? Unless there's enough, unless the key is to all this is going to be testing. And if there's some way that somebody can certify and that people can certify in sufficient numbers that they've had that test and that they're fine, then the border crossing would probably be as simple as producing a certificate as opposed to being quarantined. But they're in a situation in the United States, they can't even get everybody in Congress tested. So how are you going to test football players, baseball players, basketball players, the ordinary citizens? That's the problem. The whole political mechanism is a mess in the states. It seems to vary from state to state. You've got governors who are adamant about. You've got the Andrew Cuomo's of the world who are very cautious and systematic about reopening, and then you've got Florida saying, "Come play baseball here." You've got Georgia opening the border. So different governors have different philosophies, and I think you have to account for those differences and be very wary of opening the border until there can be some sign in the United States that is all but stamped out. You're talking hundreds of millions of people there. It's a much greater complexity in the United States than it is in Canada, and that's I don't know how you get players across the border unless there's a special dispensation given for athletes.
I also find it interesting that the Mike Spence's press secretary tested negative for the coronavirus recently, and then a couple of days later tested positive. So it doesn't necessarily mean because you're negative one day, you're not going to be positive 2 days later, because they don't know about that. So there's also that aspect. And what do you do if you have 35 Americans all staying in someplace and one of them tests positive? What do you do? Do you shut down the season then? There's that whole other thing about when we would do testing and whatnot.
All it took was Rudy Gobert to test positive, and
in the
the
whole
NBA
world.
shuts down, the NHL shuts down, junior hockey shuts down, and that's because of Rudy Gobert. Not blaming him, but that one test was the catalyst for pretty much the entire last 2 months of our lives.
Yeah. Just amazing where it's gone in
Tom
2 months.
Hanks, Rita Wilson.
It's crazy how it's gone in 2 months. Like just,
It's,
it's the
I
whole
mean, I don't
world.
hold out a lot of hope for any football this year.
I don't either. I can't. People ask
At
me that
least
all
north
the
of the
time.
border. I think the National Football League will find a way. There's just too much money at stake. Here, the financial picture is different. And you alluded to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers financial statement yesterday, but within that financial statement, Derek Taylor mentioned this on the Sports Cage yesterday. Each team was coughing up over $600,000, I believe, to prop up the Montreal Alouettes for a year.
Yeah.
So within that good news story, there was also evidence of what ails the CFL, and as much as the Rough Riders and Winnipeg Blue Bombers and Edmonton Eskimos, probably Calgary are in good shape. You've got Vancouver, you've got Toronto, you've got Montreal. Uh, those are trouble spots. Those are the anchors that produce the deficit, the collective deficit to which Randy Ambrosie referred last week, anywhere between $10 and $20 million.
Well, even though it's supporting the Alouettes, and Randy didn't bring that up in the finances, how much it costs the league to support to prop up the Alouettes, and they had to, but they sold them, so it was probably a good. Can you call it a good business decision to spend that much money to keep a team around? I
Yeah,
guess.
they eventually got the money, but
Yeah.
now that ownership group is going to keep absorbing losses, one would think.
Yeah.
And you're hoping for a benevolent ownership group, much like is the case in Vancouver, much like is the case in Toronto. And then people say, well, why should federal money go to prop up billionaire owners? And that's a valid point. But to what extent do the David Brayleys and Bob Youngs of the world, to what extent does MLSE continue to throw money at the CFL before they decide we don't want to do this anymore? These people didn't get rich by making irresponsible financial decisions.
Right.
And if they all woke up one day and said, this is unsustainable, I don't want to do this anymore, this league might be a Western Canadian league, or you might end up with a Western Interprovincial Football Union again.
Well, isn't this business model almost unsustainable right now, based on Randy's admission that they're losing $10 to $20 million a season? Isn't
That's what
the
was really interesting with what he had to say, because I mean, you've been to the State of the Union, press conferences that Randy Ambrosie's had at Grey Cups, and you've been around Randy Ambrosie or any commissioner, and it's always everything's coming up roses. Even in the mid 1990s, when the very future of the league was imperiled, as it might be now, they were always trying to put a positive spin on things. But now we're seeing the sad truth and the harsh reality of the Canadian Football League. And you're seeing that despite the fact that it gets very good TV ratings, and despite the fact TSN pumps anywhere from $40 to $50 million per annum into the Canadian Football League, the overall operation of the league from BC to Montreal is a deficit situation. And Dave Naylor talked about this the other day, just how the overall business model is broken. And it's it's clear now that was an issue even before COVID-19 came up. And that's got to be something that the federal government has to consider now, because if the CFL can't run a business in a way that is profitable collectively, what sense is there in pumping more money into a league that has a flawed business model? Isn't it incumbent upon the Canadian Football League to perhaps scale down a bit, or redo how their manner of conducting business so that a profit is more feasible? Because
I
you're
think
throwing good money after bad if you allow the CFL just to keep going the way it has.
But if they don't give it money now, Rob, they may not get the opportunity to fix that business model, because, as I said, there's no money coming in. They do have season ticket holder and whatever sponsorship and merchandise money's in there, but that's hopefully going to start them this season. So how do they bridge themselves to the point where they can fix this business model without the financial help? I don't know how they do that. They
They do need
somehow
that bridge funding,
they
not
need to.
branded bridge funding because they're no longer playing football.
There's
But
also the federal government has already invested in the CFL with the beautiful stadiums we have across this country that have all been used some federal funding to fix Mosaic to build Mosaic Stadium,
well,
Winnipeg
none,
Stadium.
none of the funding that produced the new Mosaic was federal.
Okay, well then there's okay. Was you sure? I thought it was Just right. Sorry, private finance. Okay,
And the federal government has said several times we're not in the business of building
yeah.
sports facilities, and
But we
that's
still
one of
have
the things that killed the domed Mosaic Stadium is the Fed said we're not in for this. So
yeah,
then it became a provincial and civic issue.
but they still have these huge stadiums that will sit empty if they don't support some. If people doesn't get some support, like high school football and university football is not going to pay the bills at Mosaic Stadium or Winnipeg or at Winnipeg Stadium. So there's still the impact. What do they do with these
Oh,
policies that
sure.
they have? So does that the federal's responsibility? No, but it's part of the equation. I think
Oh, it
it's
has that. I wrote about that last week. If you're a Saskatchewan taxpayer, regardless of how you feel about whether federal money, whether it's a good idea for federal money to be pumped into a professional sports league, consider the standpoint of a Saskatchewan taxpayer. And no, regardless of whether you pay it federally or if you pay it provincially, the taxpayers are on the hook for a considerable portion of the stadium. There's $100 million loan
yeah,
that the city of Regina took out from the provincial government to enable Mosaic Stadium to be built. That was the final $100 million of a $278.2 million project. And the way that they figured it out was over 30 years, based upon a projected attendance, I would think somewhere in the vicinity of 30,000 people. Apply a $12 facility fee to
yeah.
every ticket for every major event, whether it's Rough Riders games or concerts or what have you, NHL games, soccer games. And over 30 years, that $100 million will be paid off. Well, suddenly, if Mosaic Stadium 2.0 is only the host to what, maybe a concert or two every year, that whole model blows up. And the
Mm-hmm.
city of Regina is still left with 90 million plus to repay. So who gets stuck with that tab? It'll be the taxpayers. Who gets stuck with the annual maintenance in the millions of dollars every year, regardless of whether the Rough Riders are there? The taxpayers. So if you're a Saskatchewan taxpayer, it's a far better thing for your federal taxes to include a modest sum that goes toward keeping the Canadian Football League going, as opposed to having to absorb that provincially and having to absorb that locally with nearly $100 million the taxpayers have to account for. So if you're a taxpayer, you want this regardless of what you think of the Canadian Football League.
I just want to mention that you and I both know there are other issues in the world besides football. I
Yeah,
understand
there's baseball.
baseball too, and there's hockey and stuff.
No, I shouldn't be flippant. I mean, this is a very
But
serious
we're so caught up in this world that we forget. Yes, there are other businesses in other parts of the world, in Canada, that we know people aren't working. We know people are struggling to get fed, and we know there are people struggling to find jobs and everything. I understand that completely, and I'm not saying to dismiss what they're going through just because we should support the CFL, but as I said earlier, the CFL is an economic engine. Well, maybe not engine's the right word, an economic driver in cities and stuff. And you and I both know there's so many part-time employees that supplement their income with jobs from rider games at Evraz Place that need that work. And now they don't have any work in that part-time jobs. And they were most of them are the nicest people you could ever meet. They were so
Oh,
happy being
absolutely.
there. And I'll tell a quick story. I remember I went to see Leonard Skinner at Brand Center, and my seat was right down at the front row, and had hip issues. And the usher came up to me and says, "Why don't you get this seat?" Put me on the top row, which was a much better seat for my issues. What a nice little thing they did for me back then, which has nothing to do with football, but it shows what the people who work at Everest Place can do. So
Oh,
I don't,
absolutely.
we
Yep.
can't overlook that. And I keep hammering away at the economic impact of the CFL, bigger than just the players. And unfortunately, is that it's the players that are going to be dragging out because they make the so-called big money, people perception of big money. And I don't know how the CFL, somehow Randy Ambrosie has to turn that perception around so that, not that we know it, the rest of the world knows it. If you know what I mean by that.
Well, Randy Ambrosie needs a new 2.0. 1.0 before the House of Commons committee did not go well. But
Mm-hmm.
there will come a day, likely very soon, where he's going to come to the table again, and he's got to deliver, and he's got to, he's in like a second and 25 situation after what
Right.
happened last time. So he's got to deliver a performance that is devoid of the kind of holes that were apparent when he first appeared before that committee. He's really got to sell it. He's got to allay a lot of fears and overcome a lot of doubters. And this is a way bigger 2.0 for Randy Ambrosie than anything pertaining to Mexico or Germany or what have you.
Whoever does his financing and prepares him for that has a big responsibility, because I'm not saying that that's big picture stuff. The commissioner kind of brings it all together, but there's got to be someone in the background who's helping him out with this, and there's got to be some politicians who are in favor of this. And what
I
I
would
found
think
it
so. I mean, even
interesting,
look at
Kevin.
Kevin Waugh, who asked very good questions of Randy Ambrosie last week. He's the MP for Saskatoon Grasswood and was a sportscaster in Saskatoon for 40 years.
Yeah.
So there's somebody you would think is predisposed to support the Canadian Football League. Bob Bertina also has a member of Parliament, also has the CFL in his background. So you think there's people there who would be just sympathetic by nature to the Canadian Football League, but they have a responsibility to the taxpayers to ask the tough questions, and they did. And it's a matter of not only winning over the politicians, but winning over the constituents, winning over the taxpayers who ultimately will be the benefactors.
I remember way before this, I wrote a story with Michael Cram, who's my MP member of Parliament, and he had the same things. We're just not going
Yeah,
to give him a blank check. And I think that's the impression I thought Randy was hoping for. And I know Randy may say no, 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 but that's the impression that came up. They're going to say, we're the CFL, we're Canadiana, we're the Grey Cup, give us money, or we're not going to be able to survive. And the politician said, no, that doesn't work that way in our world. And I'm not saying how much it might be politicking, because there seems to be a lot of the people disparage or going against the CFL are conservatives or NDP. Maybe they don't want to see the Liberals get away with something, but that's just another thought. But it is. Are you scared? I'm not scared. And when I look at this, around the idea of training camps would open this weekend, and in a normal world, we'd be talking about all the good things that went on in the CFL. And they've done a pretty good job of hiding all these losses with a pretty bright picture for the CFL lately. And this weekend, if it hadn't happened, we'd be talking about Cody Fajardo. We'd be talking about the Riders being the host team in the Grey Cup and all these kind of things. And all these, Montreal's got new ownership, but it's all done and overshadowed with by legitimately so by what's happening to the CFL. I don't know how they'll ever get out of this, Rob. I really don't. And I know it's very pessimistic and not very bright and sunny, but I don't know how they get out of this.
I think they almost have to. I think this is going to apply to sports in general, Mer. You're going to have a market correction, and it may be a lot more severe when you're talking about the NFL, NBA, NHL, Major League Baseball, where those ticket prices are a lot harder for fans to sustain. Take a rider ticket price, and let's say it's $100. Well, that's not cheap, but they're only asking that of you for 10 games a year, including the preseason, 11 if there's a playoff game. Plus, in a year like this, there's a Grey Cup opportunity. But $100 times 10, that might be affordable for people. Now, if you live in Winnipeg, Calgary, Edmonton, wherever, and you buy a cheap seat to an Oilers, Canucks, Flames, Jets game, let's say that's $100. Okay, but you're multiplying that by 41 games, and you're probably paying more for parking. So the CFL, because of its smaller scale, that might work in its favor as far as the restructuring of the economics, whereas it could conceivably be infinitely tougher for the teams with price points that are much higher and with the number of events that are much more frequent to maintain the status quo. But I still think at some point, especially when you look at the financial realities that have been laid bare lately, the CFL has to account, I think, for the lowest common denominator when it formulates an across the board business plan, because you've got the haves and you've got the have-nots, and it's almost backwards because the smallest markets are the haves and the biggest markets are the have-nots. It's not what you would expect. It's certainly not baseball. But at some point, do you not have to build an economic equation across the board that allows everybody to make money? Do you need to scale back a little? And do you need to account for the fact that fans are going to have to scale back a little? And maybe that $100 ticket has to become 50.
Yeah.
Maybe the hot dog has to be $3 instead of whatever it is.
Or $10 beer stuff would be fun.
Once sports comes back, you just can't flip that switch and expect everything to return to normal, because sponsors are getting decimated financially. People are getting decimated financially. And people are going to be wary of gathering in large groups and accustomed to not doing so. And maybe the fact that they're now so inured to watching TV at home, maybe that just becomes the norm now. So I think you're gonna see a scaling back, not in the Canadian Football League, but everywhere. And what might be the average or anticipated budget for a CFL team now might have to be $10 million less in the future.
Yeah. We're also, we're making the assumption that fans are going to come back.
I'm not.
I don't think so. Like, I'm wearing a mask when I go out in the world now. I've only been out 3 times since I have my mask, and I haven't been tell people I feel better wearing a mask. I just think I'm doing my little part, along with staying at home and not having any sort of social life, to help flatten the curve. I look around and there's a lot more people not wearing masks. So how comfortable are people going to go to Mosaic Stadium if it opens on Labor Day to be in that kind of group? I don't know. Like, golfers, we can maybe take extrapolation to golfers. They're saying, yes, for sure, we're willing to take on all the chances because we love to golf. But you're also on a 400-acre facility where it's pretty easy to practice social distancing. It's not too easy to practice social distancing, I know, for you and me, sitting shoulder to shoulder in the press box, or fans sitting seat to seat. And so I don't know how they're going to say, yeah, I really love the Riders. I've been waiting to see them. I've been spending the last 6 months trying to have enough money for food. Now I'm going to drop on a football game where I could end up sick. I don't know.
Yeah. And that's going to be, what Tim Reed had to say to you tomorrow. Tim Reed from Emperor's Place, about how many people you can realistically expect to put into the stadium now. And again, that alters the economics right away. Even if there's an overwhelming compulsion from people to go to Rider games in the numbers that have become customary, that's not feasible. And it might not be feasible. It probably isn't feasible till they find a vaccine.
Exactly.
So this might be a 2021 issue in addition to a 2020 issue.
Yeah, we could be doing this again. We started the season. They're not starting the season in July. I think that's
well. Look at the Queen City Marathon.
Yeah,
they're going virtual. That event was to be held September 11th to 13th.
Yeah,
and now that's off the table. The CNE in Toronto, which goes into September, that's now off the table. So the August 31st cutoff point that existed in I think Ontario at one point, it existed in Alberta. Now you're talking about events being canceled well into September. And if the CFL is going to play, you'd think if they can't start any later than Labor Day weekend. Yeah. So what do you do? It's to the point where very quickly they're going to have to make a call. Yeah. What if they start a season and then somebody tests positive, or a few players test positive, or fans, to the extent that they're allowed, and then you have to shut it down again. I just wonder if the safest thing for all concerned is to say, look, this just can't be done, and let's hope we can return with a semblance of what people once accepted and enjoyed in 2021.
So let's say you're a season ticket holder and they cancel the season. Are you benevolent enough to say, yeah, I'll leave my money in with them?
No.
Or you demand your money back? Because that'll kill the league. That will absolutely bankrupt the league if they have to return season ticket. Not saying the Argos maybe they don't have many season ticket holders, but the Riders return 26,000 season ticket renewals. Boy, is that going to hammer them? So I don't know.
And it depends how people insist upon it. I'm sure there'll be the option to say, look, we've got your money. Can we just credit your account for 2021? Yeah. And then they've still got the money, and maybe the Riders take that hit next year as opposed to immediately. But then they also have the wherewithal next year to have some income coming in if the CFL returns as normal. I'm sure there'll be people that will want their money back right away. And I heard Craig Reynolds on CKRM a couple of weeks ago say, and I hope I'm remembering this correctly, that if somebody wants their money back, the Rough Riders understand what people are facing and they will get their money back. Yeah. So if that's 15,000 people, that's a big deal. If it's 2,000 people, the riders still have some money to get by. But
But
I
even
mean, this we could talk for 3 hours about all the
even repaying,
possible
I mean, even repaying them money because the
benefits.
riders are using that season ticket money is not just sitting in some bank account gaining interest. They're using that money to. I'm assuming I'm no accountant. Craig Reynolds can tell me whether otherwise because he is an accountant. They're using that money to pay salaries, to keep the offices going, to do business with that money. I'm assuming. Don't you think so? Like,
You would think. I mean, I presume that they've applied for federal
oh yeah,
assistance,
they have. Yeah,
and
yeah.
so that would be covering a considerable portion of the salaries as they exist. Other teams and the Rough Riders, to their credit, they haven't, at least as far as we know, laid off any people. Whereas you've heard stories coming out of Edmonton and various places about pay cuts or people being let go, and the Rough Riders haven't gone there yet. But they've also got reserves that other teams
Yeah, but
don't have access to.
they need that reserve to get to 2021. I think if they have to cut into that reserve for now, boy, that's like you and I maxing out our credit cards to get through this month because we don't know what next month's going to be like.
Exactly.
If that's a
Where
fair
we've got on for 36 minutes and 19 seconds.
Can we find a happy note? Where can we go to a happy place to say to everyone, it's a long weekend. God darn, it's good to be in May, the middle of May.
Well, here's my happy note. I mean, I look around and we're doing pretty well in Saskatchewan. Obviously, there are concerns, and what's happening in Losh is terrifying. And I hope everybody in that community in northern Saskatchewan is able to get through this quickly, because we in southern Saskatchewan are a little spoiled when you look at the numbers, but I don't ever want to lose sight of the fact that there's people in really tough positions elsewhere in the province, elsewhere in Canada. More than 5,300 people in Canada have died. There's more than 80,000 people in the United States who've died. And but we're lucky to be where we are. We're lucky the weather forecast for this long weekend is beautiful. And we're lucky that there are bike paths and parks, and I hope people enjoy them. And I hope your golf game finally gets below 120 this weekend.
You think how many times the May long weekend has been the absolute worst?
Yeah.
And
now we're lucky that the forecast is beautiful this weekend.
Yeah, so I'm hoping to get out golfing, and you can get out biking and walking and doing all those good things. And I don't know, maybe we could wrap it up now because I don't see the next one we have is going to be any more sunny. We don't have any more sunny days or sunny ways than this one did. But
yeah, let's hope. I'd love to be writing about sports again. That's ostensibly what both of us do.
Yes. Maybe that's our last thing. Our jobs are covering the Rough Riders. We want to keep doing our jobs. So
yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to sell a Rough Rider book right now with Indigo closed. There's always Amazon and there's always Kobo. So okay. Murray, I really appreciate your time here. It's been great this is the longest chat we've had since the pandemic started. So I'm glad we could have some people. Hopefully,
we can still. I think we should just call it Rider Ramblings.
Or something. It's
something like that.
I hope I'd love to be able to sit down one day soon and say, how is Otha Foster looking at linebacker? I think it'd be wonderful to just immerse ourselves in the minutiae of the Canadian Football League and of the Rough Riders roster as we typically would. And there will be a day when this is not forgotten, because we'll never forget this, but maybe we'll appreciate things that we once took for granted, whether it's going to a movie or going to a football game or going to the library, going to the gym. Things that we once considered automatic are now just ruled out. And I think we'll return appreciating the fact that we can walk into the front door of the Y or go to the public library and actually physically take out a book.
I'm looking forward to a haircut, if we're going to talk about and people say, well, geez, you don't have much hair. But I'll tell you something. I got hair today, and I got hair tomorrow too. More tomorrow. So my bald spot hasn't grown in, but boy, do I have a nice sort of crown going around here. Man bun maybe by the time I can get it cut. So
well, just use some more of that Head and Shoulders weed killer that you've been using, and
that's true too. Eh?
Eradicate
the longest my hair has been since high school, I think.
Wow. Really my haircut is on Tuesday at 1 p.m. So Nancy McCurdy will take good care of whatever this is atop my aging head.
Well, Don Whiteoak has got me for 2 p.m. on May 23rd. So I'm not golfing that day because I'm going to get all excited about getting my hair cut. So.
Well, I look forward to the stunning visuals. And we're very grateful that for people who've stuck with us through these. We've just hit the 40-minute mark now.
I know. Okay.
Murray McCormick, thanks very much. This is Alliteration Day. Murray McCormick's on with me, and Mark Melnichuk has produced this. This is Rob Vanstone thanking everyone for your time today, and we hope to do this again quite soon with a much cheerier subject matter than we had today. But such is the reality, and such is how we portray it. Thanks for your time, and take care and stay well.